I think there's a question about, you're going to figure out in about a year or so, that there's a serious kind of questions about what's the cause of the climate change. I'll give you a hint. I think it's from the oceans. What they found out recently is that the winds over the oceans have a huge leveraging effect on what the climate is on the planet, and that the ocean winds have changed, and that in fact maybe a lot of the climate change is derivative from the wind changes on the ocean. Why are the winds changing on the ocean? Because there's suggestions that maybe there are increased underwater volcanoes, because there's a whole lot of increased number of volcanoes on terrestrial, and so there probably are undersea volcanoes, and that might be heating up local places and changing the wind and so on. And in any case, it is changing. And to say that it isn't changing is really kind of crazy. By the way, if you want to guess, my guess of where it's going to go, what you're going to find out in about 3 or 4 years is it's going to get starting to get really cool. It's not going to get hot. It's going to be really cool, and by about 10 years, you find out that it's a mini ice age. So I keep telling Diane to go out and buy, warm stuff, because someday we're going to need it. Because what you're having is all of these aberrations in the oceans, and things are changing the conveyors and influencing, and the people up in, my scientist friends up in Europe are just freaking out. They just are convinced that the whole thing's coming apart and they're all going to fry, starting in about 2030 or something like that. But if in any case, it's changing, and it's a significant. What happens when the climate changes in a hurry? Agriculture doesn't work, because you've spent all of this time getting all of these monocultures of these certain kinds of plants to grow in these certain kinds of climate kind of things. And if the climate changes in a hurry, you can't change. We've organized, we've systematized, we've industrialized all of our agricultural processes, and you can't adjust to it fast enough. I used to tell my friends in the Navy, they ought to be making these dual-use ships. They ought to be building aircraft carriers that have, thinking about the possibility that they're going to be hauling food from one place to another, or refugees or something else, because when these kinds of problems come up, the president's going to go look at the Navy, and he's going to say, where are the aircraft carriers? And he's not going to be thinking about it in the conventional terms, if you know, and this is inside kind of lingo stuff, because the Navy always says the first thing the president says when there's a big problem is, where's the aircraft carriers? Well, he's going to say, where are the aircraft carriers? But he's going to want a whole lot of deck space so he can load a bunch of things on them and move them around. But then you have wild cards. Then you have the surprises that are in the midst of this whole thing. The one that's in play right now is in Yellowstone. I don't know if you've been following this or not, but in Yellowstone, they say there's this super volcano underneath Yellowstone. And it was raising the ground up, and the ground is coming up unusually, and what was it, 5 years ago or something like that. The scientists all said, well, the ground is coming up, but there haven't been any earthquakes, and so we're really not worried about it. And now in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we've had these clusters, hundreds of earthquakes that are increasing up to about 3.5 and so on. And so you've got swarms, that they call them, of earthquakes, and who knows? Maybe you get a volcano in the middle of this thing that makes it really tough for the Obama administration. Now, I don't want you to get all depressed and funky and go out of here. I mean, go give the bar a lot of business or whatever, I don't know. Because there's a lot of wonderful things that are happening at the same time. Let me tell you that the world is changing, and it's going to be a different place, and we got to live differently. There is no doubt about that, but it isn't all just bad news. I mean, there's extraordinary breakthroughs coming downstream. Let me ask you a question. Compared to the last century, what kind of technological change is going to happen in the next decade? Now, you got to think about this, huh? The last century. I had a grandfather who was born in 1900, and he died in 2000. So he lived 100 years, right? Got that? I remember him sitting in our home in Chicago, talking to our son, explaining to him when he saw his first airplane, when he first car, and all of these kinds of things that all happened in the last century. And if you think about it, we went all the way up to the moon, we got the internet, we've got all this extraordinary increase in complexity and amazing kind of things that happened in the last century. And you say to yourself, if in fact you follow the trends that are already in place and are really quite well established, how much technological change in the next century is there going to be compared to the last century? You think that there's going to be 80 times or 5 times? That's an exponential curve, right? You're riding your way up to this narrow part of that curve as it screams for the sky. And there's nobody in this room that even begins to have an idea about what 1,000 times the last century's change looks like. And so I cut it down and tried to project, so what's it look like for the next 10 years? Well, it's 70 or 80 times. I mean, that's crazy. That's wild. It's amazing. You can't even begin to understand what that means. In terms of what it means is that there has to be fundamental breakthroughs in terms of all of the things that support how humans live. In all aspects of science and so on, and I'll tell you about a couple of them. But what it means is that we're going to live through, at the same time when we got all these problems, amazing kinds of breakthroughs that will allow us potentially to deal with some of these problems. One of them is artificial general intelligence. Artificial general intelligence comes from the fact that if you looked at how computer power has increased, it looks like this. Now, you may look at this curve and say, well, that's not such a big deal, but this is an exponential curve. This is a geometric, and so it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 1 billionth, 1 millionth, 1,000th, 1,000 million, and so on. And so what you've got is huge kind of changes over a linear kind of horizontal axis. And you start down here with the ENIAC and the Eclipse and the Apple II and these computers. And what you see is that as you get higher and further down, increase in time, what the slope increases and gets higher and higher. So this is 1965, 75, 85, 95, and now 2005, it's probably higher than that. And what it means is that over here is the computing equivalent of the brain of a bacterium and they don't have brains, but anyway, nematodes and spiders and lizards and stuff, and what it says is that somewhere at around 2015 or let's say 2012 or something, you're going to get a single computer that has the computing power that's the equivalent of a human brain. That's the evolution of computing power. It's going faster and faster and faster. But what I've just described to you is this line on this curve. This is Moore's law that says that computing power doubles every 18 months for the same amount of cost. Because quantum computing is coming in here, and quantum computing, I don't have the time to explain to you right here, but quantum computing is really weird kind of stuff. And quantum computing goes like this compared to this. And that's why Ray Kurzweil says that there's a place out here around 2039, he thinks, where the computers get so powerful that a single computer in 2039 is more powerful than 1 billion times all of the human beings on the planet. And we start working for them. Really, he thinks that we start working for the computers because they run it all, and we kind of say, yeah, sure, go ahead. Because he's following these kinds of things, and what you're getting is extraordinary power. Now, what happens is not only are you getting these amazing kinds of capabilities in terms of hardware, but also you're making software advances, and the software advances are approaching the ability for us to do artificial general intelligence, AGI. Now, everybody knows what artificial intelligence is because if you've tried to make a reservation on United or any other kind of place, and you call up and they tell you punch 1 and punch 3 and punch 4 with a disembodied voice or whatever it is talking to you, that is artificial intelligence. That's an expert system, and it isn't very artificial because intelligent because all it knows about is one little thing. I mean, if you ask the United thing, well, how's the weather in Reno? It isn't going to tell you anything because all it knows about is how, right? But now we're on the edge of software that is general intelligence. which means it's like a human being and it learns.